What do you know about the boot process of your laptop or desktop? If you're like most people, the boot process is the process that just takes way too long after starting or restarting your computer. That brings up the questions. What process handles the boot process? What is the purpose of the boot process and who makes this happen? In simple terms, the boot process is about getting the computer going. It makes sure the OS has everything that it needs, and it also makes sure that the hardware is working properly. The code that directs this process is called the BIOS firmware. Now, the reason I'm discussing this today is because I came across an interesting article this week from 9 to 5 Linux titled Libre Boot Open Source Firmware Now Supports HP EliteBook 820 G2 laptops. The first thing I thought when seeing this headline was, what is Libre Boot Open Source Firmware? The second was, what are we using now? This is B from Talk Tech, and today I'm going to be telling you all about Libre Boot and open source firmware on this episode of Linux Sundays. But before we get into that, I have a favor to ask. If you like this type of video and want to see more content like it, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell button for notifications. Also, don't forget to give this video a like if you like it. Let me know what you liked, didn't like, or if you have any comments, questions, concerns, or emotional outbursts down in the comment section below. And lastly, make sure to stick around all the way to the end to get the most out of this video. Let's do this thing. All right, so let me go ahead and shrink myself down here. So we can actually go ahead and look here at the article. Here's the article from 9 to 5 Linux. This will also be linked down in the description below. Here is an actual picture of the laptop. These are actually older laptops. These are from these I believe were from this. It's got the i7 and i5 5000 series U processors, which are dual core, 4-thread processors. These are all the way back in 2015. Now with these laptops, they actually they have those Intel Core processors. You get USB 3 ports, you got DisplayPort that can support up to 4K 60 hertz, a VGA port. I believe VGA is only up to 1080p, if I'm not mistaken. You also get, they're 12.5 inches. They support up to 32 gigabytes of RAM, 3 storage slots supporting PCIe, M.2, and regular SATA drives, a side dock connector for docking station, and an eDP type screen that can be upgraded to a full HD 1920 by 1080 resolution. Now, I believe right now, I think most of them come standard with the 1366 by 768. And honestly, with a 12.5-inch laptop, I'd probably just get it with and leave it at the 1366 by 768 because, I have my Linux laptop and it's 13.3 inches and I use that exact same resolution. I actually downscaled it from 1080p to that resolution just because it's like I'm gonna zoom in anyway. And a lot of times when you, especially with Linux, like Windows does one thing pretty well, and that is resolution scaling. They do a pretty good job of that. Linux, it just depends on the distribution. In my opinion, I've always had better experience with Wayland when it comes to it. But with the Linux laptop that I have is running Linux Mint, so it only supports X11. So the X11 scaling is not as good. So yeah. And even if I had the Wayland option, I'd still use the actual natural scaling because then you never have to worry about any jagged edges or anything like that. Let's actually start getting into the actual content of what I wanted to talk to you about today. Now, BIOS firmware, or basic input output system, again, is firmware charged with getting the computer started. This will also, you will also, like when we're talking about BIOS firmware and things like that, you'll also hear the term UEFI. Now, this is a more modern version of the BIOS that includes a graphical user interface. I'm not going to be discussing that today, but just know that for our discussion today, I may use them interchangeably. Just know that I am referring to the same thing. Now, this process is important and critical for the functioning of the system and the OS. Now, without the BIOS firmware and the boot process, your i9 14900K and RTX 4090 PC would just be a very expensive paperweight. Now, primarily, there's a few companies that are involved in the creation, manufacturing of BIOSes and all that stuff. The primary ones are going to be American Megatrends, Inside Software, Phoenix Technologies, and Biosoft. Those are the big players in the BIOS manufacturing space. They are what are known as independent BIOS vendors, or IBVSs. They provide the actual BIOS chips to the motherboard, to the motherboard manufacturers, which will be running the IBV's proprietary code. And you notice that here, as I just said, running the IBV's proprietary code. And here, Libre Boot, we can see that that's offering open source. And open source means that it's basically free, open source. You can view the code, you can manipulate the code, you can utilize that code in, according to whatever license is under. And usually they're like the GNU public license, or GPL. I believe this one is done. I believe Libre Boot is under the GPL version 2. So yeah, it's basically free, available, free to use kind of software, which is, part of one of the big principles behind using, Linux and things like that, is to try to avoid, some people take that very, very passionately about using free and open source software, which is where you get the term FOSS. So you can see already this difference between the actual proprietary version companies and then, these organizations. And usually when we're talking about open source software, it could be somebody as small as, just like a 1 or 2 person development team, or it could be something, where it's got maybe hundreds of people working on it, like something at Canonical. Technically, Red Hat is open source, but we're not going to get into that here. Just because I know people have strong opinions on that, and it is what it is. So I'm not going to get into that, but yeah, I want to show you a couple pictures here, just so you can kind of get a feel for what we're talking about here. Now, this is the logo for American Megatrends. It's actually been updated to AMI, but this is the one that, from the 80s up until recently, this was the logo that they used. And, these are American Megatrends are actually really common on a lot of motherboards, especially desktop motherboards. So you may recognize this logo here in your boot splash screen, especially if it's the first time that you boot it up. And here is what the actual chip looks like. And if you actually look at the your motherboard, this is not my motherboard, but this is what the chip actually looks like. It's actually soldered directly onto the motherboard. It's actually possible to remove these chips and put different ones on there, but that's not something that I have the skills for. And so hey, if you want to go do that, go do it to your heart's content. But I wanted to go ahead and also show you something here. In regards to, we're going to use the ls hardware command, which is, if you're not familiar with the ls hardware command, it's going to show us details about the hardware in our system. It's not always available on every single distribution, so you may have to install that. But I'm just going to go ahead, and I just wanted to be able to show you the actual firmware for my test server here. So let's go ahead and grep that. And what we're going to do is we're going to do option A8. So basically, what this is going to do is it's going to find something exactly as we're looking for. So we're going to have a line that looks like this, and it's going to go ahead and give us the 8 lines that are present after that. So let's go ahead and execute this command. We're going to put in our password. Let it find it, and there we go. We've got the firmware here. So we can see here, it's giving us a description of the BIOS. It is, you can see American Megatrends International. It's got the version, it's got the date, size. This one's, and they're pretty small. Currently my BIOS is only 64 kilobytes, but it can hold up to 32 megabytes. And technically these are kilobytes and megabytes, but we're going to go ahead and just call them kilobytes and megabytes just for simplicity purposes. So that's what that all looks like. So let me go ahead and just kind of get back to the article here. All right, there we go. So we can actually go ahead and now start talking about Libre Boot and Core Boot. And you're probably like, okay, you told us about Libre Boot, and now you're mentioning something called Core Boot. What's going on, dude? Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about these two things. Now, before we actually talk about Libre Boot, is we have to talk about something called Core Boot. Now, before talking about Libre Boot, sorry, I just completely blanked on that one. Sorry about that, guys. Core Boot, which was previously known as Linux BIOS. Core Boot is an open source replacement for proprietary firmware that is lightweight and boots fast compared to the proprietary BIOS firmware. Now, it works across a wide range of CPU architectures and motherboard chipsets, but its compatibility is not as widespread as the BIOS firmware of the IBVs. Now, some of the supported platforms include Lenovo T400s and X200s. I believe those are both laptops. I know the T400s for sure but I'm not familiar with the X200s. Purism, who makes computing devices and maintains an OS based on the principles of software freedom, computer security, and internet privacy. Google Chromebooks, believe it or not, actually run on Coreboot. I'm pretty sure that's to help save costs and all that kind of stuff. And then Google does make some efforts to make some open source stuff and contribute and things like that. And actually, it seems like as Chromebooks and Chrome OS has evolved, it seems like Chrome OS is getting closer and closer to being an actual Linux distribution. And I would not be shocked if here in like the next couple of years, we hear Chrome OS being considered a Linux distribution, because that's what's running under the hood, with tweaks for Google's own purposes and stuff like that. And they actually even have an open source version of it. I think that it used to be called like Chromium OS or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's something like that. And they also have their Chrome Flex or something like that, I think is another one. Honestly, one of these days, I think we should just kind of like do a comparison of, how Chrome OS compares to Linux, and maybe make a determination on whether we think that as of right now, it's going to be a Linux distribution at some point in time, or maybe it's already a Linux distribution. So that's definitely something we could look at in the future. So make sure you're subscribed if you want to see content like that. All right, so also System 76 Linux Systems. They are a Linux hardware system manufacturer, or well, actually no, they're I guess they'd be an OEM. Like they build the systems, but they use off the shelf parts and stuff like that. But these are dedicated Linux systems, and they don't. And I think they typically will only give you the option for Linux systems, but I think they might have an option. There's one of the Linux hardware vendors that has an option to get dual booted with Windows. I don't know I can't remember if it's them or not, but yeah, that's System 76. Now, one of the criticisms of Coreboot is it does include some binary blobs, which are bits of proprietary code. One of the big ones that was mentioned that I saw as I was kind of doing some research was the Intel Management Engine, or IME, which allows for monitoring of certain processes and things like that, and even like whether the laptop is on or off. I believe it was probably started with the best of intentions, but it looks like there's been like some privacy issues and even some security issues. So that is one of the big ones. Now, a Libre boot, and I always want to say LibreOffice, strips these out and automates the build and installation process. Libre boot itself, it also supports the T400 and X200s from Lenovo, but it also supports X60s. I'm guessing that's another version of laptop. And as per this article, it also supports the HP 2570p, HP 8300 USDT, and the Gigabyte GA TAC G4 1M TAC ES2L. Gotta love those naming conventions. And other devices. So check out their supported hardware list down in the comment section below. I'm going to make sure it's there so you guys can check that out for yourself, as well as their website, as well as the website for Coreboot, just so you can get some more information. But yeah, so, and one of the things that I really found really interesting about this particular article is these laptops, these HP EliteBook 820 G2s, is you can actually buy those with Libre boot already on there. And I don't know if these are going to be brand new laptops or refurbished laptops, but these laptops are going on 9 years old. These are from 2015. And they don't even officially support Windows 11. They'll, as far as as of right now, as long as they can run Linux, they're going to be able to support it. So, these. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. And, I'm not against, buying used laptops. I actually really like buying used laptops, just the fact that it's been, that I'm kind of, buying it, recycling it in a way and giving it a second life, it's nice. And I don't know, I've always enjoyed having my Linux laptop being, some kind of used laptop that I have to, maybe upgrade and stuff like that. It's kind of fun. At least that's what I think. So, but yeah, if you are trying if you are trying to be as open source as you possibly can, if that's your bag, that laptop may be for you. I don't really have a link for it. I didn't look in the article, maybe in the article, but the article will be linked in the description as well. So go check that out if you want to. I personally would not buy it for that, but hey, if it's going to meet your purposes and it goes in line with the way your philosophy and stuff like that, go right ahead. Personally, it's not an issue for me, but it's always great to know that you do have options that are open source or mostly open source. If we're talking about core boot. So, but yeah, even though this is a short article, it does really create a good discussion, and I really wanted to use this as an opportunity to be able to talk about this stuff because we don't always really talk about it. And I looked around and finding videos on this topic of open source firmware and Linux, and it's just not really something that's out there. So I'm glad that I could put this out there, introduce you guys to it. Not only talk about this topic that's part of free and open source software, Linux, but also just how the computer works in general. Because if you don't that's one of the most basic things that one of the most basic processes that goes into computing. So it's always good to know a little bit more. But yeah, let me know if you want any of these topics covered today in more detail. Just be specific down in the comments below. Make sure to check out the other episodes of Linux Sundays if you have not checked those out already. If you have caught up on those, check out this other video instead. Remember, mistakes make you better, so keep on making them. Thank you so much for watching my video and have the greatest of days.